Socorro, New Mexico, 1964. It began as a routine police pursuit, just a wild teenager tooling through town, and ended with one of the most remarkable UFO episodes in history, a close encounter still impossible to ignore.
April 24th, 1964. A lone police car speeds down a dusty road. Socorro Police Sergeant Lonnie Zamora was pursuing a speeding vehicle when he noticed a strange fiery disturbance in the sky. Lonnie decided to cut off pursuit of the vehicle and instead switched his attention to the fire that he had seen in the distance. Lonnie originally suspected that the fire he had seen was actually an explosion from a well-known dynamite shack of all places. When he arrived at the scene, Lonnie originally described what he saw as a car crashed into a gully. As he got closer, he realized that the crashed car he had seen was actually a shiny, egg-shaped aluminum white object. Only could be really described as a craft. Lonnie would describe the craft as about 20 feet long and 8 to 10 feet tall, and it rested on 4 metallic legs. It also notably had a red arrow-like insignia on the side, which is very important and we will talk about a little bit later. Perhaps just as interesting, Lonnie also mentioned seeing 2 people, or what he thought was people, standing next to the craft. He described them as wearing white coveralls.
Went up this road about a half a mile, and then I stopped my car and I got out and looked out, and I could see a white looking object in the distance. I thought it was an overturned car at first, but I got into my patrol car and went up closer to it. I could see a couple of, looked like a couple of coveralls hanging from a clothesline. I couldn't see what it was, but it looked like a couple of coveralls.
Being a police officer, Lonnie would later write a detailed report about this whole incident. When he spoke about the people, he said, quote, "Saw 2 people in white coveralls very close to the object. One of these persons seemed to turn around and look straight at my car and seemed startled. Seemed to jump quickly somewhat. The only time I saw these 2 persons was when I had stopped, for possibly 2 seconds or so, to glance at the object. I don't recall noting any particular shape or possibly any hats or headgear. These persons appeared normal in shape, but possibly they were small adults or large kids." Lonnie decided to drive down closer, thinking it might be 2 people in need of some help of some kind. As he approached the craft, he took the time to radio the sheriff's office, letting him know that he would be busy checking out the accident down there. As he was radioing, Zamora heard 2 loud metallic sounding bangs. The next part of this incident is probably best described by Zamora himself. Quote, "Hardly turned around from car when heard roar. Was not exactly a blast. Very loud roar. At that close was real loud. Not like a jet. Knows what jets sound like. Started low frequency quickly. Then roar rose in frequency to a higher tone and in loudness. From loud to very loud. At the same time as roar, saw flame. Flame was under the object. Object was starting to go straight up, slowly up. Flame was light blue and at bottom was sort of an orange color. From this angle, saw side of the object, not end as I had first noted. It was difficult to describe flame. Thought from roar it might blow up. Flame might have come from underside of object at middle, possibly 4 feet area. Very rough guess. Could not describe flame further except blue and orange. No smoke except dust in immediate area. All this commotion caused Lonnie to flee and try and take cover behind his patrol car. As the object hovered out of the gully, Lonnie got a better look at the red insignia on the side, which he described as about 2.5 feet high and about 2 feet wide. He actually ran further away until he stopped hearing the roaring noise that he had heard earlier. When the roaring stopped, Zamora turned around. The object then immediately seemed to speed away. Zamora described this speed himself as, quote, "immediately taking off across country." He also said the object lifted up slowly, but then, quote, "got small in the distance very fast." When it was moving with forward momentum, it had no flame and no smoke and no noise. He was able to see it for a few more moments until it disappeared over a mountain. He radioed Nep Lopez, who was a radio operator, as this was happening, trying to see if Nep could see the object as well. Nep hadn't seen the craft, probably because it moved away so quickly. Zamora also radioed fellow police sergeant Sam Chavez. The craft was gone, and soon Chavez would show up. Chavez arrives on the scene.
He's a very dependable, honest type of person. He's not one to create or make stories or build things up to make it exciting or anything like that. He's a very well-liked type of a person.
So far, we have a reliable witness telling a rather incredible story about something anomalous. But what takes this case to undeniable status is what the two officers would discover after the craft had left the scene. Chavez and Zamora would go down to investigate the place where the unknown object had been just moments before. They immediately noticed bushes that were actually still burning. Chavez actually mentioned stamping a bush out himself. Even more startling, they noticed 4 imprint marks in the dirt. These imprint marks were evenly spaced out and described as about 20 inches long, about 9 inches wide, and in a trapezoid pattern. One of the imprints was actually on a rock, and that rock showed signs of metal scraping. More people began to arrive at the site, including more police officers, Albuquerque FBI agent Arthur Barnes Jr., and Army Captain Richard Holder, who was actually from the local White Sands Proving Grounds. During this time, Zamora would also sketch the symbol he had seen on the side of the craft. They saw no signs of footprints or any kind of explosives that could have been used if this had been a hoax. Zamora would write his full report during this first evening. As they decided to call it a night because it was dark, Holder actually asked everyone involved with that investigation not to speak to the press or public. He would also specifically mention the symbol that Zamora had talked about. The next day, more investigators would arrive at the scene to join the previous investigators. This included local police force investigating this, along with the FBI, the Army, the Air Force, and Project Blue Book, the government's official UFO study group at that time.
To the Air Force and government, they say they don't know what it was, and they never told me the not to say or say about it, talk about it, but they say that they don't know what it was.
All the investigators could clearly see charred roots, plants that were smoldering, and the imprints still in the ground. Samples were collected, including plants and soil. Zamora was also interviewed repeatedly. Everyone who talked to him described him as a credible witness who is not prone to excitement. The story also begins to make national headlines. Hector Quintanilla, head of Project Blue Book, decided to send J. Allen Hynek to study this event. J. Allen Hynek was an astronomer and a key investigator in many major UFO cases during this time period.
The incident was very interesting, to say the least. It seems to differ from practically all the earlier cases we investigated from one standpoint. The vehicle had left pod marks.
Both Hynek and Zamora would eventually give radio interviews at the local Socorro station KSRC.
And did it have any kind of markings on it of any kind that you noticed?
Yes, it did. Not from that far, I didn't see the markings. When I went up closer to it, I did see the markings.
And someone said that the markings, as you saw it, was an upside-down V with 3 lines running through it.
No, sir, I couldn't tell you that because they still don't want me to say nothing about the markings.
No, they don't want you to say anything about the markings. All right, we won't question you on that.
Now, about this marking, could you tell us how he described the marking and what the marking was?
Yes, I see no reason why not. He described it to me as an inverted V with a sort of a bar across it. And as he described it and drew it, the thing that I was reminded of is a typical brand you have, a cattle brand. As though whatever the instrument, whatever the device was, as though somebody had branded it as you might brand a cattle.
In his interview, Hynek, perhaps accidentally, mentions the symbol to be an inverted V with 3 bars. However, when reports of this incident began to come out, the symbol changed to what could be described as an umbrella-like symbol. Some people aren't sure which symbol is the real one, but the water seems to have been muddied over time, and the truth is harder to find than ever. Here's a piece of evidence that I had to dig pretty hard to find. What does it mean? Can we find anything similar to either symbol online anywhere? Returning to the investigation at hand, the soil and plant samples had been sent into labs to see what they can figure out. The Air Force would come out and say that the burned bush had shown no signs of chemicals that could have been propellant residue and no evidence of any pyrotechnics on site. However, we can't ignore this lead from Dr. James E. McDonald. McDonald was an atmospheric physicist from the University of Arizona, and he's also a personal favorite researcher of mine. In 1968, McDonald spoke about them potentially finding, quote, fused sand at the Socorro site. McDonald states, "A woman who is now a radiological chemist with the Public Health Service in Las Vegas was involved in some special analysis of materials collected at the Socorro site. And when she was there, the morning after, which would be April 25th, 1964, she claims that there was a patch of melted and solidified sand right under the landing area. I have talked to her both by telephone and in person here in Tucson recently." McDonald continued, "There were a few organic materials they couldn't identify, but most of the sample was just sap. Shortly after she finished her work, Air Force personnel arrived and took all her notes and materials and told her she wasn't to talk about it anymore. Eventually, after investigations from the Army, Blue Book, Air Force, police departments, Blue Book was forced to admit that this case defied explanation, labeling it as unidentified.
We went over the case completely. We had soil samples tested at the Air Materials Laboratory. The burnt bushes were analyzed for propellant residue. We measured the distances between the pod marks. My first reaction was that it was a lunar test module from NASA or the Air Force. That seemed to be the only logical explanation. This was probably the best documented case in the Air Force files, and I checked it out everywhere, all the way up to the top, even to the White House command post, and nothing.
Possible explanations from a skeptical point of view have been floated over the years. They include a misidentified helicopter, a secret military craft, a lunar module prototype test, and the explanation that has somehow gotten the most traction, which is a hoax propagated by local students. How these mischievous students would have completed this? Pyrotechnics and a balloon, of course. Dr. Sterling Colgate, president of local college New Mexico Tech, had this to say about this Socorro incident. "I have a good indication of the student who engineered the hoax. Student has left. Cheers." Colgate over time would not give any more information about the students that had supposedly created this hoax, and also no explanations were found. Also keep in mind that this would discredit the investigation done by numerous different departments. The FBI, the Army, the Air Force, Blue Book, all of them somehow would have had to have missed the supposed pyrotechnics, footprints in the dirt that students would have undoubtedly left. Blue Book, who had no issues describing other cases as balloons, certainly didn't think that balloon was in the realm of possibility on this one. For the most part, this event seemed to only be one primary witness that saw it. However, 4 years later, in 1968, Hynek was actually able to interview two other potential witnesses. They were Larry Kratzer and Paul Keyes. Keyes seemed to only remember a dust cloud and a shiny object. Kratzer had a much more detailed account.
Okay, I guess. I'll tell you, your aircraft sure fly low around here. How's that? We were south of town, headed north. Something flew right across the hood of the car, doing about 150 miles an hour.
Almost hit our car.
A white oval-shaped object.
He mentioned potentially seeing portholes on the side of the ship, and in a bit of a difference, mentioned a red marking. However, it was in the shape of a Z. While corroboration to the story is nice, it's possible that after 4 years they were simply influenced by what they had seen in the media. However, thanks to FOIA'd FBI documents, we learn about another sighting only 70 miles away from Socorro in the town called La Madera, New Mexico. This sighting occurred only about 30 hours or so after the Lonnie Zamora sighting, and it bared some striking resemblances. Identical craft, scorch marks on the ground, and even 4 indentations found in the dirt. Orlando Gallego and his family were eyewitnesses to this craft, which reportedly moved in about the same way as Zamora's had. They also denied further knowledge of the Zamora landing, which had again only happened about a day and a half ago. Given that this event happened in 1964, you have to wonder how much information was reported out in only a day and a half. Was that enough time to hear about the scorch marks and the indents in the dirt that were strikingly similar, along with the description of the craft that Zamora had seen? Information about this landing is a lot harder to find, and as we can see from the FOIA documents, Gallego is basically written off as a drunk, despite the startling similarities to the Zamora sighting. But there is another sighting that we need to talk about in correlation with Zamora's case. Gary Wilcox in Newark Valley, New York, saw an identical craft on the exact same day as Zamora. At first, Wilcox thought it was a fuel tank in his field as he was spreading fertilizer. When he approached, he actually noticed it was a giant metallic egg-shaped craft. He walked up to it, thumped it, as he said, and even kicked it. He said it was metallic and it was an aluminum color, no rivets, seams, and no vibration when he touched it. It gets even better. 2 men who were described as 4 feet tall came out of the craft, and they were dressed in white suits covering their entire body. Wilcox was nervous until he happened to hear a voice come from one of them. It said, "Don't be alarmed, we have spoken to people before." Wilcox would state that their voices might not have even been English, but he could still understand them, and that their voices seemed to come from their body, not their head. They would talk for hours until the unknown object and its occupants hovered into the sky before darting off to the north. This story may seem harder to believe, but it just adds another data point to the pile to keep in mind. But Gary Wilcox is described as a reliable veteran who actually told his family immediately after this event happened. His family would back up his story and stated that they did not hear about the Lonnie Zamora story until a few days later. For more of a deep dive into the Gary Wilcox story, check out this article linked down below. It can only be found on Internet Archive and really paints Wilcox as a reliable witness. I'd highly recommend reading the entire thing. It's not very long, but it is fascinating. However, even if we ignore these potential extra cases and witnesses, we still have a highly reliable witness and physical evidence to go along with the investigations that turned up no results. For Zamora, it was often reported that hazing from coming out with this story is the reason why he eventually would step away from the police force and take up a position as a landfill supervisor. His story would remain consistent until he passed away in 2009. Events can show up on the undeniable case list for different reasons. In my last video, I discussed the Washington, D.C. flap of 1952. That incident had multiple eyewitnesses viewing craft, radar data, a potential debunk that doesn't really hold up under scrutiny, and more. But why the Socorro incident remains undeniable is completely different. It has a trained, reliable primary witness with no UFO background, survived multiple investigations by the Air Force, FBI, Project Blue Book, and the police, left physical traces of evidence, and was described as an official unknown by Project Blue Book.
If they want to believe me, good. If they don't want to believe me, it's all right too.
The message here being, we need to work together to remove the stigma around UFO sightings. If credible witnesses are around, if there's other data to be analyzed, without bias, and follow where the data takes us. But I want to hear what you all think. Is there anything I missed? Is there a major UFO event that you want me to cover and you believe deserves to be on the undeniable case list? Let me know in the comments down below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more deep dives. Catch you next time.